Hola, buenos días. Good morning. All right, good. Last week I bought some oxtail. Beautiful. Fantastic, eh? The oxtail, the rabo de toro.
Chapo.
No, chapo to you. All right, let's look at some of the selection we have here for beef. Aleta de ternera is skirt steak from this part of the cow. If you've ever had fajitas, you've probably had aleta or skirt steak. This is a great cut of beef for marinating and doing all kinds of funky stuff with it. Rump steak comes from the back hind quarter of the cow. Solomillo, very tender. Doesn't have a lot of taste. Why? Because it doesn't have that fat and it doesn't have that muscle. It doesn't work. The cow doesn't work that muscle, so it's nice and tender. All right, here we have hoja de ternera, which is chuck. Comes from this part of the cow. You can make great steaks with this. This is often used for a pot roast. Great for hamburgers. Now, when I make a hamburger, I get this. Now, remember, when you have hamburger, when you make hamburger, you want to get 80% lean meat, which is carne magra, and 20% fat. That's the ideal combination of lean meat and fat for your hamburger. You need that taste. Now, espaldilla. This is not really a cut of beef in the United States. In the United States, they normally have the bone. We would call this beef shank, but it comes from the top part of the foreleg. Churrasco. Short ribs. Braised. Very popular now in the United States. Koreans have a great short rib recipe. Now he's taking apart a rib roast. Look at that, look at that. Look at that hunk of meat. You can fry that, you can grill that, you can roast that. In the United States, we cook something called a prime rib. That's the chuletón, no? That's a rib steak. So you take several bones of that and you put it in the oven like in roast beef. That's called a prime rib. This has been aged probably about a week. So if you eat fresh beef like that without aging, the intensity of the flavor just isn't there. Look at that loin. That is a classic New York strip. Look at the marbling. You see the marbling? That gives it flavor. I made this last week as well. I eat too much beef, I know. That's a ribeye steak.
Esto es esencia.
That's gorgeous. Look at that color. Nice and red. Now let's look at the lamb. We have a lamb shoulder, the paleta, roasted. You can cut it up in steaks as well. Lamb leg. Well, with a little bit of oil, a little bit of salt, it doesn't need much. Brits like to use mint sauce with this. You can if you like. I like a simple preparation. Recental lamb. 3-month-old lamb. This is probably more commonly seen in the United States than the milk-fed lamb, which is chuletas chuleta de cordero lechal. We don't have that really that much in the United States. 3-month-old lamb. We would like some more meat to our lamb chops. Fresh pork sausages. You don't really see that in the United States, and let me tell you why. Because you don't see this in the United States. People do not do their daily shopping in this kind of market. They normally go to a hypermarket, supermarket, a mega market, and it's a bit cold. It's a bit impersonal. Here you've got personal attention. And these people make their stuff, their sausages, these people make their sausages fresh daily. You know, I like that. I like to invest in my local market. Pork chops. Pork chops from Iberian pig. The Iberian pig is a black pig fed with acorns most of the time, if it's cebo. Completely acorns and herbs. Now, here we have the loin of the pork loin. When you smoke this, you have, in the States, something called Canadian bacon. Okay? We put that on sandwiches, we put that on pizza. Pork tenderloin, not as expensive as the beef tenderloin, but you know, you can do a lot of things with this. Be careful with the pork tenderloin. It dries very easy. Now, I just discovered a recipe for pork loin Wellington, wrapped in pastry puff. I'm going to try that next week. Now, who hasn't had ribs? I make some great ribs. Come over here. Look at that. These are baby back ribs, not spare ribs. These are baby back ribs. Spare ribs are longer. Now, these, because of the cartilage and the toughness, you have to cook these low and slow. Every time you've got a piece of meat with a lot of cartilage, a lot of tissue, you cook it low and slow. Now, we have the chuck of the pork, similar to the chuck of the beef, which comes from this part. Now, what I do is I put this in an oven. I inject it with liquid smoke. I put some dry rub all over it, and then I put it in the oven with, I don't know, a temperature of 119 degrees centigrade, and leave it for 4 or 5 hours. All right. Now, afterwards, after 4 or 5 hours, you can just pull it apart with your fingers. This is the dish of North Carolina, called pulled pork. They cook it nice and slow. Again, as I said before, low and slow. And so after 4 or 5 hours, you can just pull it apart. Now, we also have something called a pig picking in North Carolina, where they roast a whole pig, and basically you can just take your finger and pull away the meat. It's so juicy and tender. And the crunchy skin. You have to have the crunchy skin. And as we saw before, the oxtail. A nice slow braise. Cut up some veggies, carrots, leeks, mushrooms, pearl onions, a little bit of wine. And I served these last weekend with egg noodles. Instead of the usual fried potato, I served it with egg noodles and just poured that gravy goodness over the noodles. My daughter loved it, and she took home a tupper. Jose is going to cut into the ham section of a pig. Now, what he's going to do is get a pork shank, fresh. This is you would call this the codillo ham knuckle. There you go, look at that. I made this with some wild mushrooms from my veggie place. Again, low and slow. It falls off the bone. It took about 4 or 5 hours to do, but hey, it's worth the effort and time. Don't use a pressure cooker. Do not use a pressure cooker. Now, papada. The papada comes right under the neck. You know, I've got one. That's why I wear a scarf. Now, what I normally do is when I make my hamburger or when I want to make meatballs, I want a lot of fat content. So I'll take some beef, the chuck, maybe a kilo of chuck and 250 grams of this portion of the neck, and I grind them together. It gives it an added dimension to your meatballs or to your hamburgers. And it's a little bit of pork, but that fat is beautiful. And that fat is melt in your mouth kind of goodness. And you can cut this up in little dices and fry it. and it makes a great aperitif. Okay, now we've had marinated ribs and marinated loin. Not my favorite. I like the French stuff. The paprika for me is too strong. The flavor's too intense. Now this is fresh fatback. What we saw previously was salted, and that's called salt pork. Or salted fatback. This is often used, well, like I do, with Spanish cocido madrileño. I cook my green beans with this stuff, and I cook my kale. Remember kale? Berza. Ternera blanca. Milk-fed veal. Very young veal. You can notice the difference between the color of this milk-fed veal to the cow. It's a subtle taste, very sublime, very tender. Come here, I want to show you something. Look at that. If you have ever heard of T-bone, this is only 1/2 of a T-bone. On the left-hand side is where the tenderloin would go. And in the States, this would be considered a T-bone. As it is, it's a bone-in New York strip. Well, you know, we've learned a lot about meat today, and I'm going to personally thank, these are my personal butchers. I come here every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. And Fran, thank you very much. Hey,
Thank you for you.
you're the man, and Jose, thank you. See you on Saturday, okay? All right, bye-bye.